The Bentley's engine screamed once, then fell silent on a lonely stretch of road. A billionaire stranded, unaware his life was about to be rebuilt by a 12-year-old girl with a wrench. Alistair Finch had everything money could buy: a private jet, a portfolio that moved markets, and a vintage Bentley worth more than most houses. At 72, he was headed to sign away his empire, a final deal in a life built on power and precision, when his prized car coughed, smoked, and died on a deserted country road. No phone signal, no help in sight, until a 12-year-old girl with grease-stained hands and a rusty bike appeared. "I can fix it," she said. Alistair nearly laughed. But this wasn't just any girl. Lily Miller was her grandfather's legacy, a prodigy mechanic raised in a workshop of forgotten engines and quiet genius. That roadside breakdown wasn't a nuisance. It was destiny knocking. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A broken-down car on a lonely road holds a secret that will change a billionaire's life forever. A young girl with grease-stained hands and old eyes holds the key. What she knows will unravel a past he tried to bury. The old Bentley purred, a low growl of contentment that echoed the mood of its driver, Alistair Finch. At 72, Alistair had the kind of wealth that whispered, it didn't shout. His empire was built on quiet acquisitions, shrewd investments, and a reputation for being as unmovable as the granite mountains that flanked this winding country road. He was on his way to a meeting, a final one, the culmination of a 50-year career. The sale of Finch Industries, his life's work, to a soulless conglomerate he despised. It was a deal born of necessity, not desire. A concession to his age, his lack of an heir, and the relentless march of time that even a man of his resources could not halt. He checked the time on his vintage Patek Philippe, a gift from his late wife. Eleanor had always hated this part of him, the relentless drive, the obsession with legacy. "You'll own the world and have no one to share it with," she'd once said, her voice soft with a sadness he hadn't understood at the time. Now, in the sterile silence of his Bentley, her words echoed with the clarity of a prophecy fulfilled. That's when the car coughed, a single, undignified sputter that broke the rhythm of the powerful engine. Alistair frowned. His cars didn't cough. They were maintained by the best mechanics in the world. Every part was checked, every fluid topped, every system analyzed with a precision bordering on obsession. Another cough, this one more violent. The car shuddered, the smooth glide turning into a clumsy stagger. Warning lights, a frantic constellation of amber and red, bloomed across the polished mahogany dashboard. Alistair's hands, usually relaxed on the leather-bound steering wheel, tightened. "No, not now," he muttered, the words a low growl of frustration. He steered the dying car towards the shoulder of the road, a plume of white smoke billowing from the hood like a final, defeated sigh. The engine gave a metallic groan, and then silence. A profound, unnerving silence, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal and the gentle rustle of leaves in the autumn wind. Alistair Finch, the man who could move markets with a single phone call, was stranded, in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service. He sat for a moment, encased in the opulent failure of his machine, a perfect metaphor for his life. A beautiful, expensive shell, broken on the inside. He got out of the car, his bespoke suit feeling suddenly ridiculous in the rustic setting. He popped the hood, more out of a sense of duty than any real hope of understanding the mechanical chaos within. The smell of burnt oil and hot metal assaulted his nostrils. He saw a tangled mess of wires and hoses, a language he didn't speak. "Looks like you've got a problem there, mister." The voice was young, clear as a bell. Alistair turned, startled. He hadn't heard anyone approach. Leaning on a rusty bicycle, her small frame dwarfed by the massive car, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, a few stray strands sticking to her forehead. Her clothes were worn but clean, faded jeans, a t-shirt with a faded NASA logo, and sturdy-looking boots. Her hands, he noticed, were stained with grease, the kind that gets deep into the creases of your skin and never quite washes out. But it was her eyes that held his attention. They were a startling shade of blue, and they held a seriousness that seemed out of place in such a young face. She wasn't looking at him with the awe or curiosity he usually inspired in strangers. She was looking at his car, her head tilted, a thoughtful expression on her face. "It's a bit more than a problem, I'm afraid," Alistair said, his voice laced with an irritation he didn't bother to hide. "It's a catastrophe." The girl wheeled her bike closer, her gaze fixed on the smoking engine. "It's not a catastrophe. It's a blown head gasket. And a cracked radiator hose, by the looks of it." She pointed a small, grease-stained finger. "See that spray pattern? That's coolant. And the smoke is too white for an oil fire. It's steam." Alistair stared at her, dumbfounded. He had engineers, mechanics with decades of experience, who would have taken an hour to diagnose the problem with a battery of electronic tests. This child had done it in 10 seconds from 10 feet away. "And how would you know that?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. The girl shrugged, unimpressed. "I fix things. Tractors, mostly. Old ones. My grandpa taught me. He used to say that any engine, no matter how complicated, is just a story. You just have to know how to read it." She leaned her bike against a tree and walked to the front of the car, her movements sure and confident. "Mind if I take a closer look?" Alistair was about to refuse, to tell her to run along, that he had it handled, though he clearly didn't. But there was something in her quiet confidence, in the calm, analytical way she studied the engine, that made him hesitate. He was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut was telling him something extraordinary was happening. "Be my guest," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. The girl didn't seem to notice his tone. She leaned over the engine, her small hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She gently touched a hose, then a wire, her fingers reading the engine like a blind person reading Braille. "Yep," she said after a moment. "Head gasket is definitely gone. You pushed it too hard on these hills, didn't you?" She looked up at him, her blue eyes pinning him in place. "These old Bentleys, they're beautiful, but they're not meant for this kind of work. They're like old gentlemen in fine suits. You can't ask them to run a marathon." The corner of Alistair's mouth twitched. He had been pushing it. Late for his meeting, his mind a whirlwind of numbers and clauses, he'd driven with a rare recklessness. The analogy was so apt, so surprisingly insightful, that he found himself at a loss for words. "I can fix it," the girl said, her voice matter of fact. Alistair let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of genuine surprise. "You can fix it? Young lady, my personal mechanic, a man I pay a small fortune, would need a week and a fully equipped garage to fix this." "Well, I'm not your personal mechanic," she said, wiping her hands on a rag she'd pulled from her back pocket. "And I don't need a week. I need a few hours. And some tools." She looked at him, a challenge in her eyes. "Unless you'd rather just stand here and wait for a tow truck. But I reckon you're in a hurry. You look like a man who's always in a hurry." Alistair was taken aback. The girl's perception was uncanny. He was in a hurry, or he had been. Now, time seemed to have stretched, to have become a fluid, uncertain thing. The meeting, the deal, the culmination of his life's work, it all seemed to be fading, replaced by the bizarre reality of this roadside encounter. And where, exactly, would you find the tools to fix a 1958 Bentley Continental in the middle of this wilderness? He asked, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "My house is just over that hill," she said, pointing. "My grandpa's workshop is there. He's got everything we'll need. He was a mechanic in the army. A legendary one, they say. He could fix a tank with a wrench and a prayer." She smiled for the first time, a small, shy smile that transformed her serious face. "My name's Lily, by the way." "Alistair," he said, extending a hand out of habit, then letting it drop, feeling foolish. Lily's eyes fell on the hood ornament of the Bentley, the iconic Flying B. She reached out a hesitant hand and traced its elegant lines. "My grandpa had a picture of a car like this in his workshop," she said softly. "He told me it was the finest car ever made. He always dreamed of working on one." Her voice was wistful, filled with a longing that seemed too old for her years. "He passed away last year." Alistair felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Sympathy, perhaps. Or maybe it was a recognition of a shared loss. He, too, knew the ache of an empty space where a loved one used to be. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his voice softer than before. Lily nodded, her gaze still on the ornament. He would have loved this. He would have known just what to do. She looked up at Alistair, her eyes clear and direct. but he taught me well, so I know what to do too. There was a long silence, filled only by the sounds of the forest. Alistair looked at the girl, at her grease-stained hands and her impossibly old eyes. He looked at his dead car, a monument to his own impotence. And he made a decision. A decision that went against every instinct, every rule he had lived his life by. He was a man who trusted experts, who paid for perfection, who never, ever left things to chance. And yet, "All right, Lily," he said, the words feeling strange in his own mouth. "Let's go to your grandpa's workshop." Lily's face lit up. "Really? Really?" Alistair said, a strange sense of calm settling over him. The meeting could wait. The deal could wait. For the first time in a long time, Alistair Finch was not in a hurry. He was curious. He wanted to see what this extraordinary girl could do. Lily ran to her bike, her movements suddenly light and childlike. "Come on," she called over her shoulder. "It's not far. And don't worry," she added, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I'll have you back on the road in time for your important meeting." As Alistair followed the small figure pushing her rusty bicycle up the hill, he had the distinct feeling that his life was about to take a very sharp, very unexpected turn. He had set out that morning to close a chapter of his life, to sign away his legacy. He had a feeling he was about to find a new one. The walk was short, but for Alistair, it felt like a journey to another world. The manicured lawns and sterile perfection of his own estate were a universe away from this untamed beauty. The air here was different, thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something else, something real. Lily, surprisingly strong for her size, pushed her bicycle with a steady rhythm, her worn boots crunching on the gravel path. Alistair, in his hand-stitched Italian leather shoes, felt clumsy and out of place. They crested a small hill, and a modest, single-story house came into view. It was a simple, well-kept home, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. A porch swing swayed gently in the breeze, and a riot of wildflowers grew in a lovingly tended garden. But it was the building next to the house that drew Alistair's eye. It was a large, barn-like structure, its weathered with the color of old silver. This, he presumed, was the legendary workshop. "Here we are," Lily announced, her voice filled with a quiet pride. She leaned her bike against the porch railing and led him towards the barn. The large double doors groaned in protest as she slid them open, revealing a space that was part garage, part museum, and part sanctuary. The first thing that struck Alistair was the order. Every tool, every wrench, every screwdriver was hung on a pegboard wall, its shape outlined in white paint. Jars of screws, nuts, and bolts were neatly labeled on shelves that reached the high ceiling. The concrete floor was clean, swept free of the usual grime and clutter of a workshop. An old, pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, a comfortable-looking armchair next to it. The air smelled of oil, sawdust, and old books. In the center of the room, on a set of heavy-duty jack stands, sat the skeletal frame of a vintage motorcycle. It was a beautiful, powerful-looking machine, half-assembled, a work in progress. On a workbench next to it, engine parts were laid out on a clean cloth, each piece meticulously cleaned and cataloged. But it was the walls that told the story of the man who had created this space. Framed photographs of old cars and airplanes hung next to detailed mechanical drawings and yellowed newspaper clippings. One headline caught Alistair's eye. "Local hero, Sergeant Miller, keeps Army flying." Below it was a picture of a much younger man, his face beaming with pride, standing in front of a World War II-era fighter plane. He had Lily's eyes. "Your grandfather?" Alistair asked, his voice softer than he intended. Lily nodded, her gaze following his. "That's him. Sergeant Tom Miller. He could fix anything." She walked over to a large, roll-away toolbox, the kind professional mechanics use. "He built this place with his own hands after the war. Said it was the only place he could find peace." Alistair looked around the workshop again, seeing it now through Lily's eyes. This wasn't just a place to fix things. It was a legacy, a testament to a life of skill, dedication, and quiet passion. It was a world away from his own, a world of boardrooms and balance sheets, of hostile takeovers and market fluctuations. He had built an empire of numbers, of abstract wealth. This man, this Sergeant Miller, had built something real, something tangible, something that could be passed down, not in a will, but in a shared love of how things work. "Okay, Lily said, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. Let's get that Bentley of yours. She pointed to a heavy-duty tow chain hanging on the wall. We'll need this. And the old winch. It still works. For the next hour, Alistair found himself taking orders from a 12-year-old girl. And to his astonishment, he didn't mind. Lily directed him with the calm authority of a seasoned general. She showed him how to attach the tow chain, how to operate the hand-cranked winch, and how to steer the dead Bentley as they slowly, carefully, pulled it up the gravel path and into the workshop. It was hard work, physical work, the kind Alistair hadn't done in 50 years. He felt the pull in his shoulders, the strain in his back, and a strange, unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. Once the car was safely inside, Lily went to work. She was a whirlwind of focused energy. She moved around the car with a fluid grace, her small hands sure and steady. She laid out her tools on a clean cloth, each one chosen with a specific purpose in mind. She drained the remaining coolant, disconnected the hoses, and began the laborious process of removing the cylinder head. Alistair watched, mesmerized. He had seen teams of mechanics work on his cars, their movements a choreographed dance of efficiency. But this was different. This was personal. Lily talked to the car as she worked, a low, steady murmur of encouragement. Come on now, old girl. Don't be stubborn. Let's get you breathing again. She worked with a quiet intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration. Occasionally, she would pause, look at a problem from a different angle, and then, with a decisive nod, find a solution. She was not just following a set of instructions. She was thinking, adapting, problem-solving. She was, as her grandfather had said, reading the story of the engine. You're very good at this, Alistair said, breaking the comfortable silence. Lily didn't look up from her work. Grandpa taught me. He said I had a feel for it. A kind of mechanical sympathy, he called it. She finally loosened the last bolt on the cylinder head and, with a grunt of effort, lifted the heavy piece of metal clear of the engine block. She placed it carefully on the workbench. There's your problem, she said, pointing to the gasket. It was a thin piece of metal, warped and blackened. A clear breach was visible between two of the cylinders. Just like I thought. Blown. And look here. She pointed to a network of fine cracks on the cylinder head itself. This is worse than I thought. The head is cracked. Probably from the overheating. Alistair's heart sank. So it can't be fixed? Oh, it can be fixed, Lily said, her confidence unshaken. But not with what I have here. We'll need a new cylinder head. And a new gasket set, of course. She looked at Alistair. This is a rare car. Finding parts won't be easy. Alistair felt a familiar surge of impatience. This was where his world had the advantage. I can have a new cylinder head flown in from anywhere in the world by tomorrow morning, he said. Just tell me what to order. Lily shook her head. No need for that. There's a place about an hour from here. An old scrapyard. The guy who runs it, Old Man Hemlock, he's got a whole barn full of vintage parts. Grandpa and I used to go there sometimes, just to look around. It's like a museum of lost cars. She looked at him, a hopeful expression on her face. I bet he's got what we need. Alistair hesitated. A scrapyard. It sounded undignified. He was a man who dealt in new, perfect things. Not rust and decay. But then he looked at Lily, at her hopeful face, and he thought of the adventure. The sheer, unadulterated strangeness of it all. When was the last time he had done something unexpected? All right, Lily, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Let's go to the scrapyard. Lily's answering grin was dazzling. Great. I'll call Mr. Hemlock and tell him we're coming. You can use the phone in the house. She pointed towards the yellow house. And maybe you can call your people and tell them you'll be late for your meeting. As Alistair walked towards the house, he pulled out his satellite phone, a device that had never failed him, no matter where he was in the world. He had one bar of service. Enough. He called his assistant, a young, ambitious man who lived in a state of perpetual anxiety. Marcus, he said, his voice calm and steady. I need you to postpone the meeting. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Postponed, sir? But this is the Finch Industries deal. You said nothing could be more important. Alistair looked through the window of the workshop. He saw Lily, her small figure silhouetted against the open doors, carefully cleaning the engine block of his broken car. He saw the legacy of Sergeant Miller, a legacy of skill and love and things that were built to last. And he felt a shift inside him, a reordering of priorities that was as sudden and as profound as the failure of his engine. "I was wrong, Marcus," he said, a newfound clarity in his voice. "Something more important has come up." He ended the call before his bewildered assistant could reply. He felt a sense of liberation, a freedom he hadn't felt in years. He had spent his entire life building an empire, a monument to his own ambition. Now, in a dusty workshop, with a 12-year-old girl as his guide, he felt like he was finally starting to build something that mattered. He was a long way from his world of power and prestige. But for the first time in a very long time, Alistair Finch felt like he was on the right road. The drive to Hemlock scrapyard was an education. Lily's mom, a kind-faced woman with her daughter's blue eyes, insisted they take her old pickup truck. It was a sturdy, no-nonsense vehicle, the polar opposite of Alistair's Bentley. The engine rumbled, the suspension groaned, and the cab smelled of hay and dog. Alistair, wedged in the passenger seat, found it all strangely comforting. Lily, in the middle, was the navigator. She gave directions with a confidence that belied her age, pointing out landmarks that Alistair would never have noticed: a crooked old oak tree, a collapsed barn, a bridge over a dry creek bed. She told him stories about her grandfather, about the cars they had fixed together, about the lessons he had taught her. "He always said that a car is more than just a machine," she said, her voice soft with memory. "It's a time capsule. It holds the stories of the people who owned it, the places it's been. You have to respect that history when you're working on it." Alistair thought of his own collection of vintage cars, pristine and perfect, kept in a climate-controlled garage, rarely driven. He had seen them as investments, as symbols of his success. He had never thought of them as having stories. He was beginning to realize that he had missed the point of a great many things. Hemlock scrapyard was less a yard and more a sprawling, chaotic kingdom of automotive ghosts. Acres of cars, in various states of decay, were arranged in long, neat rows. It was a graveyard of steel and chrome, a testament to the relentless march of time. But to Lily, it was a treasure trove. "Look," she said, her face pressed against the window. "A 1965 Mustang. And over there, a Studebaker." Grandpa loved Studebakers. They found Mr. Hemlock in a small, cluttered office, a grizzled old man with a face like a road map and hands as gnarled as oak roots. He greeted Lily with a warm, grandfatherly smile. "Well, if it isn't my best customer," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What can I do for you today, little bird?" Lily, with a seriousness that made Alistair smile, explained the situation. She described the Bentley, the blown head gasket, and the cracked cylinder head. Mr. Hemlock listened intently, stroking his long, gray beard. "A '58 Continental, you say?" he said, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "A rare bird, indeed. I might have something. In the back barn. Come with me." He led them through the labyrinth of dead cars to a massive, dark barn at the far end of the property. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the smell of dust and decay. Alistair's eyes, accustomed to the bright sunlight, took a moment to adjust. As they did, he gasped. The barn was filled with cars. Not the rusted-out hulks in the yard, but classic, vintage automobiles, covered in thick layers of dust, but otherwise intact. It was a private collection, a secret museum of automotive history. "My personal stash," Mr. Hemlock said, a note of pride in his voice. "The ones that were too special to scrap." He led them to the far corner of the barn, to a shape shrouded in a heavy canvas tarp. With a theatrical flourish, he pulled the tarp away. Underneath, covered in a thick layer of dust, was a Bentley, the same model as Alistair's, a 1958 Continental. It was a ghostly twin, a silent, sleeping giant. "Been sitting here for 30 years, Mr. Hemlock said. Belonged to a fella who lost everything in the crash of '87. Never came back for it." He ran a hand lovingly over the dusty fender. "Engine's still good. I turn it over every few months, just to keep it from seizing." Lily walked around the car, her eyes wide with reverence. She ran a hand over the hood, her touch gentle, almost tender. "It's perfect," she whispered. "The cylinder head should be compatible," Mr. Hemlock said. "We can pull it for you. It'll cost you, though. A part like that, it's not cheap." Alistair stepped forward. "How much?" he asked, his voice echoing in the vast, silent barn. Mr. Hemlock named a price. It was a significant sum, more than most people make in a year. Alistair didn't even blink. He pulled out his wallet, a slim, elegant piece of crocodile leather, and counted out the cash. Mr. Hemlock's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He looked at Alistair, then at Lily, then back at Alistair. A slow smile spread across his face. "You know," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Your girl here, she's a special one. Reminds me of her granddad. He had the gift, too. The magic touch." He looked at Alistair, a shrewd, appraising look in his eyes. "You're a lucky man to have found her." Alistair looked at Lily, who was already discussing with Mr. Hemlock the best way to remove the cylinder head. He saw the passion in her eyes, the intelligence in her hands, the quiet confidence in her voice. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the old man was right. He was a lucky man, indeed. The afternoon was spent in a flurry of activity. With Mr. Hemlock's help, they removed the cylinder head from the donor car. It was heavy, greasy work, but Lily was in her element. She knew exactly what to do, which bolts to loosen, which hoses to disconnect. Alistair, feeling a growing sense of camaraderie, found himself acting as her assistant, handing her tools, holding a flashlight, wiping away grease. By the time they were done, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They loaded the heavy cylinder head into the back of the pickup truck, a trophy from their quest. As they drove back to Lily's house, a comfortable silence settled between them. Alistair looked out the window at the passing countryside, at the long shadows stretching across the fields. He felt a sense of peace, a contentment that had eluded him for years. He had spent the day in a scrapyard, covered in grease, taking orders from a child, and he had never felt more alive. When they got back to the workshop, Lily, despite the late hour, was eager to get back to work. "We can have her running by morning," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. Alistair, to his own surprise, found himself agreeing. The thought of his sterile, empty hotel room held no appeal. He wanted to see this through. He wanted to see the old Bentley roar back to life. As Lily began the meticulous process of cleaning the new cylinder head, Alistair's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Marcus again. He ignored it. The world outside this small, brightly lit workshop seemed to be fading away, losing its urgency. The only thing that mattered was the here and now. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, the smell of solvent, the steady, rhythmic sound of Lily's hands at work. He found himself thinking about his own life, about the choices he had made, the things he had built. He had created an empire, but what was his legacy? A name on a building? A number in a bank account? He looked at Lily, at the inheritance of skill and passion she had received from her grandfather. That was a real legacy, something that couldn't be bought or sold. "Lily," he said, his voice quiet, "your grandfather, he would be very proud of you." Lily looked up from her work, a smudge of grease on her cheek. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I know," she said softly. "He's with me. Always." Alistair felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of his own wife, Eleanor. He had been so busy building his empire that he had never really taken the time to learn what she was passionate about, what her dreams were. He had provided for her, yes, but had he truly shared his life with her? He was beginning to fear that he knew the answer. Later that night, as Lily continued to work with a tireless determination, her mother brought them sandwiches and hot chocolate. They ate in the comfortable silence of the workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of old machines and the promise of a new beginning. Alistair watched Lily, a sense of wonder growing within him. This girl, with her old soul and her grease-stained hands, was teaching him a lesson he had desperately needed to learn. A lesson about the value of hard work, the importance of legacy, and the simple, profound joy of fixing what is broken. He had come to this place a rich man, a powerful man, a man who thought he had everything. But as he sat in the quiet workshop, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand, he realized that he had been the one who was truly broken. And a 12-year-old girl, with a wrench in her hand and a heart full of her grandfather's wisdom, was slowly, carefully, putting him back together again. He didn't know it yet, but the old Bentley wasn't the only thing that was being repaired in that dusty, quiet workshop. Alistair Finch's soul was getting a much-needed overhaul, and the cost was far greater than any cylinder head. It was a price paid in humility, in wonder, and in the dawning, terrifying, and ultimately liberating realization that he had been living his life all wrong. And as the night deepened and the work continued, he found himself hoping, for the first time in a very long time, that the morning would be slow to come. The night wore on, measured not by the hands of a clock, but by the steady progress of their work. Alistair became a willing apprentice. He learned to clean a spark plug, to properly torque a bolt, to feel the subtle difference between a thread that was catching and one that was stripped. Lily was a patient teacher, explaining each step in simple, direct language. She never made him feel foolish for his ignorance. Instead, she seemed to enjoy sharing her knowledge, her face lighting up when he successfully completed a task. Grandpa used to say that every bolt has its own song, she told him as she guided his hand to tighten a nut on the manifold. You have to listen. Too tight, and you'll break it. Too loose, and it'll cause trouble down the road. You have to find that sweet spot. The note of perfect harmony. Alistair, a man who had orchestrated multi-billion-dollar mergers, found himself completely focused on the simple, tactile task of finding that note of perfect harmony. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment when Lily nodded in approval. It was a satisfaction purer and more immediate than any business deal he had ever closed. He learned more about Sergeant Thomas Miller that night, not just from Lily's stories, but from the workshop itself. He saw the jigs and tools the man had made by hand, the clever solutions he had devised for complex problems. He saw a mind at work, a mind that was both brilliant and practical, a mind that saw the world not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood and, if necessary, fixed. At some point, Lily's mother came to the door, a worried expression on her face. Lilybug, it's almost 3 in the morning. You need your sleep. Lily, her hands deep in the engine bay, didn't even look up. Almost there, Mom. I can't stop now. We're at a critical point. Alistair saw the flicker of pride and concern in the woman's eyes. He stepped in. It's all right, Mrs. Miller. I'll make sure she doesn't overdo it. We're almost finished. She looked at Alistair, this stranger in an expensive, grease-stained suit, and seemed to find something in his face that reassured her. She nodded. All right, but don't let her forget to drink some water. As the first hints of dawn began to soften the edges of the dark sky, they reached the final stage. The new cylinder head was in place, the gaskets were sealed, the hoses were connected. Everything was ready. Okay, Lily said, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. This is the moment of truth. She slid into the driver's seat of the Bentley, her small frame almost lost in the plush leather. Alistair stood by the open hood, his heart pounding with an anticipation he hadn't felt in decades. Lily looked at him through the windshield, her blue eyes wide. She took a deep breath and turned the key. The starter motor whirred, a hopeful, questioning sound in the quiet morning. It turned once, twice, and then, with a deep, throaty roar, the engine caught. It sputtered for a moment, coughed out a puff of blue smoke, and then settled into a smooth, powerful, perfect purr. The sound was magnificent. It was the sound of resurrection, the sound of a problem solved, of a challenge met and overcome. It filled the small workshop with a symphony of controlled power. Lily let out a whoop of pure joy, her tired face breaking into a radiant smile. Alistair felt a grin spread across his own face, a wide, unself-conscious smile of a kind he hadn't worn since he was a boy. He leaned against the fender of the car, a wave of relief and a strange, unexpected emotion washing over him. It felt like victory, a shared victory. He walked over to the driver's side door. Lily was revving the engine gently, her ear cocked, listening to its song. Perfect harmony, Alistair said, his voice a little hoarse. Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining. Perfect harmony, she agreed. They let the engine run for a while, a celebratory chorus in the early morning air. When they finally shut it off, the silence that followed was not empty, but filled with a sense of accomplishment. Alistair knew the time had come. He had to repay her. He had to put a value on what she had done. It was how his world worked. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his checkbook. Lily, he began, his voice taking on the formal, businesslike tone he was so used to. I am incredibly grateful for what you've done. You are a remarkable young woman, and you deserve to be compensated for your time and your extraordinary skill. He clicked his pen, a solid gold fountain pen, and poised it over the check. What would you say to $10,000? He thought the amount was generous. It would be a life-changing sum for a family like this. Lily's smile faded. She looked at the checkbook in his hand, and a shadow passed over her face. She shook her head. No. Thank you, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Alistair was taken aback. No? I don't think you understand. I understand, she interrupted, her gaze unwavering. But my grandpa taught me that you don't put a price on helping someone who's stranded. It's just what you do. Alistair was speechless. He had built his life on the principle that everything had a price. Every service, every skill, every minute of a person's time. Lily's refusal was a rejection of his entire worldview. But you spent all night working, he stammered. You bought an expensive part. You have to let me pay you for that, at least. Mr. Hemlock gave us a discount, she said. For Grandpa's sake. He said to consider it a professional courtesy. She slid out of the driver's seat and faced him, her expression serious. But there is something you could do for me. For my grandpa. Alistair put his checkbook away, a feeling of shame washing over him. He had been so clumsy, so transactional. He had almost cheapened this extraordinary experience with his money. Anything, Lily, he said, and he meant it. Anything at all. Lily hesitated, as if gathering her courage. My grandpa, he had a dream. He spent years designing a new kind of engine. A more efficient one. Lighter, more powerful, and better for the environment. He built a prototype. She pointed to the half-assembled motorcycle in the center of the workshop. That's it. Or a part of it. She walked over to a large, metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder. It was filled with hand-drawn schematics, pages of complex calculations, and detailed notes written in a neat, precise hand. He finished the designs just before he got sick, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He even filed for a patent. But the filing fees, the lawyers, it was too much. We didn't have the money. The application was rejected. He died thinking he had failed. She placed the binder on the workbench, her small hands resting protectively on the worn leather cover. He believed this engine could change things, could make the world a little better. I believe it too. I've been trying to finish the prototype to prove that he was right. But I'm not him. I'm missing some things, some knowledge, and I don't have the resources to build it properly. She looked up at Alistair, and her blue eyes, so full of strength and wisdom, were now shining with unshed tears. You're a powerful man, Mr. Finch. You build things. You make things happen. I don't want your money. I want your help. Help me finish my grandpa's work. Help me show the world what he created. That would be payment enough. Alistair stood frozen, the leather-bound binder lying between them like a sacred text. He was being offered a gift far more valuable than any check he could ever write. He was being offered a chance to be a part of a legacy. A real legacy. Not one of profit and loss, but of innovation, passion, and a grandfather's love. He reached out and placed his hand on the binder, his fingers brushing against Lily's. He felt a connection, a current of shared purpose that was more powerful than any contract he had ever signed. He looked at the girl, at her tear-streaked, grease-stained face, and saw not a child, but a guardian of a sacred trust. He saw the spirit of Sergeant Thomas Miller, a man who had fixed fighter planes with a wrench and a prayer, a man who had dreamed of a better engine, a better world. In that moment, Alistair Finch understood. His journey had not been about a broken-down car. It had been about a broken-down life. His life. And this was his chance to fix it. Lily, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. It would be my absolute honor. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Alistair did not just offer his help. He threw the full weight of his resources and his 50 years of business acumen into the project. But he did it in a new way. He didn't delegate. He participated. His first call was not to his lawyers, but to the finest patent attorney in the country. He explained the situation, and the attorney, intrigued by the story, agreed to take on the case pro bono, as a personal favor to Alistair. His second call was to the head of research and development at his own company, a brilliant but jaded engineer named Dr. Eris Thorne. Alistair had always treated Thorne as a high-priced employee. Now, he spoke to him as a colleague, an equal. Eris, he said, I'm sending you a set of plans. I need you to forget everything you're working on. I need you to look at these with fresh eyes. This is not about profit. This is about potential. I'll be there this afternoon to walk you through it. He then booked a private jet. Not for himself, but for Lily and her mother. He wanted Lily to be there, to present her grandfather's work herself. When he told Lily, she was hesitant. A private jet? I can't. Lily, Alistair said gently, your grandfather's ideas deserve a first-class ticket. And you are his ambassador. You have to be there. The sight of Lily, in her clean but worn jeans and NASA t-shirt, walking into the gleaming, state-of-the-art R&D lab of Finch Industries was a sight Alistair would never forget. The engineers, in their crisp lab coats, looked at her with a mixture of confusion and condescension, until she started to speak. With Alistair by her side, Lily opened her grandfather's binder and began to explain his designs. She spoke with a clarity and a passion that was mesmerizing. She didn't just understand the mechanics. She understood the philosophy behind them. She explained the novel combustion cycle, the unique materials he had proposed, the elegant simplicity of the design. Dr. Thorne, a man famous for his skepticism, listened with a growing look of astonishment. He asked sharp, probing questions. Lily answered every one of them without hesitation, often pointing to a specific page, a specific calculation in her grandfather's notes. After an hour, Dr. Thorne was silent. He walked over to the large whiteboard, picked up a marker, and began to sketch out an equation. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned to face Lily. In theory, he said, his voice filled with a reverence Alistair had never heard from him before, this is impossible. It violates several known principles of thermodynamics. He paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. But according to these calculations, it works. My God, it actually works. He looked at the binder in Lily's hands as if it were the Rosetta Stone. Your grandfather? He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a genius. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of excitement. The engineers crowded around Lily, no longer seeing a child, but a peer. They saw the heir to a legacy of brilliance. Alistair stood back and watched, a profound sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had not created this. He had simply opened a door. He had provided a stage for a story that was waiting to be told. The project, officially codenamed Project Miller, took on a life of its own. Alistair funded it personally, setting up a separate foundation to oversee its development. He insisted that the patent, when it was finally granted, be solely in the names of Thomas and Lily Miller. This was their legacy, not his. He found himself spending more and more time away from his own business, and more time in the R&D lab, or back at Lily's grandfather's workshop, which they had converted into a secondary research facility. He learned to read schematics, to operate a lathe, to understand the complex interplay of physics and engineering. He was not just an investor. He was a student. One afternoon, as they were working on a particularly difficult part of the prototype, Alistair's assistant, Marcus, called. He sounded flustered. Sir, the board of the conglomerate, they're getting impatient. They're threatening to pull out of the deal if you don't sign the papers by the end of the week. A year ago, those words would have sent a jolt of panic through Alistair. His legacy, the sale of his life's work, was on the line. But now, as he stood in the quiet workshop, a wrench in his hand, the threat seemed hollow, meaningless. He looked at Lily, who was hunched over the engine, her brow furrowed in concentration. He looked at the walls, at the pictures of Sergeant Miller, a man who had measured his wealth in skill and integrity, not dollars and cents. Let them pull out, Marcus, Alistair said, his voice calm and clear. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Sir, did you say let them pull out? But this is your legacy. Alistair smiled. He looked at the half-finished engine, a machine born of a grandfather's dream and a granddaughter's love. A machine that had the potential to change the world. No, Marcus, he said softly. I'm looking at my legacy right now. He hung up the phone, the world of high finance and corporate battles feeling like a distant, half-forgotten dream. He picked up his wrench and got back to work. He had something to fix, something important. And for the first time in his life, he knew he had all the right tools. 2 years passed. They were not years measured in stock market fluctuations or corporate acquisitions, but in breakthroughs and setbacks, in the smell of solder and the hum of a finely tuned machine. The Miller engine, as it came to be known, evolved from a collection of drawings into a gleaming, tangible reality. It was even more remarkable than Thomas Miller had dreamed. It was lighter, more powerful, and cleaner than any internal combustion engine in history. It had the potential to revolutionize not just the automotive industry, but everything that relied on a motor, from cargo ships to lawnmowers. Alistair Finch was a changed man. The sharp, impatient edges of his personality had been worn smooth. The empire he had spent a lifetime building now seemed like a hollow shell compared to the vibrant, purpose-driven world of the Miller Foundation. He had walked away from the sale of Finch Industries without a backward glance, channeling his personal fortune into creating a new kind of legacy. The Foundation's mission was simple: to find the other Lily Millers of the world. The brilliant, overlooked minds in dusty workshops and quiet garages, the geniuses hidden in plain sight. The day of the official unveiling of the Miller engine was a media circus. The automotive world, the tech industry, the environmental community, they had all gathered in a massive, state-of-the-art auditorium that Alistair had built for the occasion. The prototype, housed not in a modern chassis but in the lovingly restored 1958 Bentley Continental, sat on a revolving stage, a perfect fusion of past and future. Backstage, Alistair adjusted his tie. He felt a nervous energy he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't worried about the engine. He knew it was perfect. He was worried for Lily. Now 14, she stood beside him, calm and composed, ready to address the world's press. She was no longer just a girl who could fix a car. She was the face of a new era of innovation. "Ready?" he asked her, his voice gentle. She nodded, a small, confident smile on her face. "Grandpa would have loved this," she said softly. "All these people, here to see his dream." She looked at Alistair, her blue eyes clear and full of a wisdom that still astonished him. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything." "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved more than just my car that day." It was the truth. She had saved him from a life of wealthy solitude, from a legacy of cold, hard cash. She had given him a purpose, a family, a reason to believe in the future. The presentation was a triumph. When Lily, in her clear, steady voice, explained the genius of her grandfather's design, the room was spellbound. When they started the engine, and the Bentley purred with a quiet, clean power that was almost silent, the audience of seasoned engineers and cynical journalists broke into spontaneous applause. The Miller engine was not just a breakthrough, it was a revolution. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and a celebratory quiet had settled over the auditorium, Lily approached Alistair. She was holding a small, worn, leather-bound book in her hands. "I found something," she said, her voice hushed. "I was cleaning out the last of Grandpa's old army footlockers to make more space in the workshop. I found his journal." She opened the book to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The entry was dated July 1944. The handwriting was the same neat, precise script that filled the engine designs. "July 12, 1944, the entry began. A new lieutenant arrived today. A young fella, barely out of his teens, full of fire and ambition. Name's Finch. Alistair Finch. Thinks he knows everything, but has a good heart under all that polish. He's got a staff car, a beautiful Bentley, a brand new Continental that his father, some big-shot industrialist, pulled strings to get him. He drives it too hard, of course. Cracked a cylinder head today showing off on a rough patch of road. The other mechanics said it was a write-off, that we'd never find the parts out here in the middle of nowhere. But I told him I could fix it. The kid looked at me like I was crazy. But I see the way he looks at that car. It's more than just a machine to him. It's a symbol of the future he's fighting for. I think I can get him back on the road. I like a challenge." Alistair took the journal from Lily's hands, his own trembling slightly. He read the words over and over again, the memories flooding back, sharp and clear, across the chasm of 70 years. He remembered the young, cocky lieutenant, so sure of himself. He remembered the grizzled sergeant who had looked at his broken car with an infuriating calmness and said, "I can fix it." He had been so impatient, so dismissive of the quiet, brilliant mechanic who had worked a miracle with scavenged parts and sheer ingenuity. He had tossed the man a few bills, a condescending gesture of thanks, and had driven away without a backward glance, his mind already on the next promotion, the next victory. He had never even bothered to properly thank him, to recognize the genius that stood right in front of him. He looked up from the journal, his eyes meeting Lily's. In her face, he saw the echo of the man he had failed to see all those years ago. The same quiet confidence, the same intelligence, the same startlingly blue eyes. The universe had not been random. It had been precise. The breakdown on that lonely country road had not been an accident. It had been an appointment. A second chance, offered across generations. A chance to finally see the value of a man he had overlooked, to honor a legacy he had unknowingly been a part of from the very beginning. His car hadn't just broken down. It had brought him home. He fixed it, Alistair whispered, the words catching in his throat. He looked at the Bentley, gleaming under the stage lights, a perfect circle, a story complete. Your grandfather, he fixed my car. Lily smiled, a tear tracing a clean path through the light dusting of celebratory confetti on her cheek. No, Alistair, she said softly, her wisdom far exceeding her years. He taught you how to fix it yourself. Alistair Finch, the billionaire, the titan of industry, stood in the quiet auditorium, the weight of his 72 years settling upon him not as a burden, but as a blessing. He had spent his life accumulating wealth, power, and possessions. He thought he was building a legacy, but he was wrong. A legacy is not something you build for yourself. It's what you help others build. It's the seeds you plant, the knowledge you share, the dreams you help to mend. He looked at the young girl beside him, the keeper of her grandfather's flame, and at the beautiful machine that had brought them together, a testament to a genius that had refused to be forgotten. He finally understood. The most important things in life are not the things you own, but the things you fix. And sometimes, the thing that is most in need of repair is yourself. The lesson had taken a lifetime to learn, but it had arrived just in time. The purr of the Miller engine was the sound of a promise kept, a debt repaid, and a future, once broken, finally, beautifully, fixed. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.